Hey guys, it's Professor Tiffany Martin with Medical Microbiology, and we are in Chapter 15, Innate Immunity, and we have covered the first line of defense, which is our physical barriers, and this video is going to deal with our second line of defense, and specifically the cells. Second line of defense is once it gets inside, then what happens? We're going to divide this up into cells and chemicals and processes. So this is our second line of defense. All of this is still innate, which is non-specific. This is our body's defense against any foreign invaders that the body deems worthy of an immune response. Okay, so if we get through skin and mucous membranes, if these pathogens penetrate through our physical barriers, then what happens? Well, there are some things that can immediately happen, innate, so non-specific to any type of invader that gets through our physical barriers. All right, so we have cells, antimicrobial chemicals, and processes. We're going to first talk about cells, and when we're talking about that, we're talking about cells in the blood, white blood cells. So we're going to do a little bit of review on that. So I am going to pause this, let you guys do a little quiz, do some review. Go ahead and look through the PowerPoints. You are looking at slides 13 all the way to 22. Answer these questions. Again, some of this is stuff you've done before, so it's easier if you review it, and then we can come back and make the video shorter. Okay? Okay, so you are back and you reviewed some components about the blood. So I do want to point out the difference between plasma and serum. Plasma and serum are both the liquid portion of the blood. Plasma is what's in your body. Serum is what we call plasma when the clotting factors are removed. So that's just something to be aware of, because when you're drawing blood, some tubes have a anticoagulant in it to remove these clotting factors. Some medical tests can need to be performed on serum. Some medical tests need to be performed on plasma. So that's just something to kind of be aware of and make a note of. Let's talk about iron in our blood and what happens with the iron. Iron, as you reviewed, our hemoglobin carries oxygen, and iron needs iron to form the hemoglobin and to carry oxygen. We know oxygen is important because it's the final electron acceptor in our cellular respiration, and we know without cellular respiration and no final electron acceptor, we can't make ATP, and if we can't make ATP, we die. So iron is very, very important with this oxygen and getting oxygen through our bodies, through our cells, to all of our tissues and to our cells in our body. So we need iron. Many of our bacteria also need iron. So some pathogens are able to stay in our bodies because they steal our iron. They need iron to survive. We have it. They're inside us. If they can steal our iron, then they can get more oxygen and then they can survive. And so there's kind of a tug of war going on. So I wanted to point this out in that where our body produces some iron binding compounds, some molecules that bind to iron with these hemoglobin, and they're called, these iron binding compounds are called transferrin. We make transferrin. Transferrin binds to iron. We need iron to carry oxygen. That's good. Microbes also make iron binding compounds or proteins, and these are called siderophores. Siderophores are made by the bacteria. Siderophores also bind to iron, and they do it really well. So if we have transferrin in our blood system and we have siderophores produced by the pathogens, the bacteria, then the siderophores are going to steal the iron. They're going to bind to iron at a higher affinity and effectively steal our iron. One thing our body can do to protect ourselves is when we find that the transferrin is not being bound to iron, we can then produce another compound called lactoferrin. Lactoferrin also binds to iron. This is something we make in response to the presence of siderophores. Lactoferrin binds to iron better with a higher affinity than siderophores. So basically, it's an iron tug of war. We make transferrin, they make siderophores, they steal it from the transferrin, we make lactoferrin and steal it back. This is a defense mechanism. It is non-specific because any bacteria that's doing this kind of thing will just be stealing back the iron. If they don't get iron, they can't get oxygen and their cellular respiration won't work, and they can't make ATP, and the microorganisms will die. This is a way we can protect ourselves. Now, some bacteria make an additional compound called hemolysins, and we know what these are from lab. Hemolysins are a compound that the bacteria make that lyse our hemoglobin. So they destroy our hemoglobin, and then they can take the iron. So it's again, it's all about stealing nutrients for this, and in this case, iron. So if a bacteria produces hemolysins, that's considered a virulence factor, something that allows it to get in, stay in by stealing nutrients. All right, so that's something to bring to your attention. Okay, so that's some stuff about blood. What else do we need to know about in this slide? You guys reviewed erythrocytes, platelets, leukocytes, and these are our white blood cells that are going to protect us from that. So we've got our stem cell and our bone marrow. Erythrocytes are our red blood cells. Platelets are those clotting factors. Then we have all of these leukocytes that are in the blood. Lymphocytes are going to be involved in adaptive immunity. Those are going to be differentiate into our T cells and B cells. All of these are the ones we're talking about now. These are involved in our innate immunity. And these white blood cells are helping to protect us non-specifically. Many of them are capable of phagocytosis. So we're going to also talk about phagocytosis. Basophils, neutrophils, eosinophils, are all considered what am I talking about? Granulocytes. The basophils, so all the fill ones are granulocytes, and they're just called that because they're kind of a granular texture. They're all capable of phagocytosis. They're also capable of diapedesis, and you reviewed what that meant. That means it can exit the blood. All right, so those are our granulocytes. The agranulocytes include the lymphocytes. Most of those are the T cells and B cells. They'll be involved in the adaptive immunity, but there is a lymphocyte called an NK cell, a natural killer lymphocyte, that is involved in the innate immunity. So we'll talk about that a little bit in this chapter. Monocytes, these are our macrophages. They're also capable of phagocytosis. So phagocytosis is a big deal. Those are some pretty pictures. You can see the granulocytes actually look granular in texture, and these are the agranulocytes. I don't need you to know any more in detail on that. There's ways that you can tell the difference, but we don't need to know that at this point. All right, what's the deal with this? Why is this a big deal? Well, our body will make these different cells in response to invasion. We'll have some to begin with, and if we get invaded, our body can reproduce more of them. So we can do a complete blood count, a test, medical test, to look at the different cells and see what are present. Going back, do we have a lot of basophils? Do we have a lot of eosinophils, neutrophils? There is a percentage that's typical in your body, and then if we get a lot more of different ones of these, we can kind of figure out what type of infection the patient may be dealing with. If we get a lot of eosinophils, more than are typical, we know our patient is either dealing with a parasitic worm infection or allergies. That's kind of funny because we don't usually think about parasitic worms and allergies being all that connected, but our body responds to them in the same way. They respond by making increased numbers of these eosinophils. These are our defenses that are going to go attack and phagocytize these invaders, but they will form for allergies and they'll form for worms. So interesting thing. Why do they do that? What's similar between allergens and parasitic worms? And there's a lot of research into that, and we find that in countries that get regular exposure to parasitic worms, so these are our developing countries, may not have good access to sanitation and clean drinking water. They get regularly exposed to parasitic worms. That is a big problem, a big disease in those countries that needs to be treated, and a problem. But then those countries also don't suffer from allergies. So that's kind of interesting. Now, in developed countries, we don't get a lot of worm infections here because of better sanitation, and we suffer with allergies. And they think that our immune system, by being exposed to these parasitic worms in childhood as we're growing up, helps develop our immune system, and then our immune systems don't overreact. An allergic response is just our immune system overreacting to an invasion. Your body has something foreign inside it, and your body is treating it as worthy of an immune response. Really, it's just Texas. We're living here, there's allergies, something's in the tree, we inhale some pollen, our immune system goes haywire, foreign invader, no, no, no. And that's not necessary. We're like, calm down, immune system, don't make me sneeze, it's just some pollen, calm down. But our immune system goes into a hyperimmune response, and we get those allergies and those inflammation, runny nose, itchy eyes, that kind of thing that comes with our body's immune response to that. All right, so if we get a lot of exposure to worms, we don't tend to develop allergies, and we think that it's involved in training our immune system. They've actually done some work where they treat allergies by giving patients worms. Okay, interesting. Then they treat the worm infection. So again, it's an interesting connection. If you are practicing in the United States and you do a CBC, complete blood cell count, you get high eosinophils, you're probably dealing with a patient that's dealing with allergies. If you are doing a trip overseas into an area where they do have issues with worm problems and you get a high eosinophil, you're probably dealing with a parasitic worm infection. So you get some information from this test. So eosinophils, allergies, or worms. Bacteria trigger high numbers of leukocytes and neutrophils, and viral infections show increase of lymphocytes. So by doing a blood count, we can determine if we have a viral infection from that.